Welcome back to the second session of Econos 2. I hope you all enjoyed lunch as much as we did. Now that everyone had lunch, I hope you all are energized and ready for the second session we have for you.
Okay, now I would like to invite the 5 speakers that will be speaking in the second session. The first speaker is Professor Sofwan Albana Khoiruzad. The second speaker, Dr. Apirat Petsiri.
Professor Phukgung, Dr. Shayan Watanaputi, and Dr. Kwebo Huang.
Please also welcome the second session's moderator, Dr. Piti Si Sangam, Director of Academic Affairs, ASEAN Studies Center, Chulalongkorn University.
Thank you very much. And since the stage is quite crowded and I'm a big guy, so I take the liberties of the moderator to arrange all the discussions from here, from the podium. Good afternoon and welcome back to the Econos International Conference on ASEAN Studies. These sessions in the afternoon, after the first sessions, our scholars already set the tone, already introduced to us what is the difference from Southeast Asian studies, what is the ASEAN studies, and of course some of the scholars who presented on the morning sessions already introduced us about some interesting topic we should focus on the ASEAN study centers, on the ASEAN studies. Hence, in this afternoon, the second plenary sessions, I will encourage you guys to listen and think with us about what is new. What is the new trend in ASEAN studies? Of course, these plenary sessions get the top scholars from not only Thailand, not only ASEAN, but our dialogue partners as well. So I would like to introduce you to the panelists. We have Professor Sofwan Albana Khoiruzad, Executive Secretary, ASEAN Study Centers from Universities of Indonesia, top universities in Indonesia, alongside with Gadjah Mada universities. I would like you to welcome him. We also have Associate Professor Dr. Apirat Petsiri, Directors of the Centers for ASEAN Studies from Khon Kaen University, Thailand, top university in Thailand as well. We have Professor Phok Gung, President of the Cambodian Institute for Strategic Studies from Cambodia. Please welcome. And then we have another scholars from Thailand to introduce to you, Dr. Chayan Wantanaputi, Directors of ASEAN Study Center from the northern regions of Thailand, Chiang Mai Universities. And of course, last but not least, we have Dr. Kwebo Huang, Secretary General of the Associations of Foreign Relations from our ASEAN partners, Taiwan. So to start, I think you guys already see what's on the screen. European Loss Appeal. Really? Let's listen to Dr. Sofwan. Please, Dr. Sofwan.
Thank you very much, Professor Piti, for the kind introduction. And I have to say that the session after the lunch is also one of the most difficult part of a conference, because all of the participants are at the crossroads. Should I enter the session or should I just continue eating this delicious food? But I think most of you are choosing to be here in this room, and so I would like to thank you. And I would like to go quickly to the presentation today. As we have discussed in this morning, we discussed about how ASEAN studies could act as a way to emancipate ASEAN scholars to talk about themselves, because of the previous Western domination in the Southeast Asian studies. But what I would like to bring to our attention today is that not only on the ASEAN, or on the Southeast Asian studies is the knowledge production was dominated by Western academia, but also in some way the discussion about the institution of ASEAN itself is also pretty much influenced by this trend. For example, when we are talking about ASEAN, it is often inevitable to compare it with the European Union. It's in many European Union scholars, EU scholars, always try to portray ASEAN as the embodiment of the emulation of the European Union. In that way, I would like to look at what is happening recently in the Europe, and then what that will mean for us in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia. First, the Greek debt crisis is making global headlines because of its possible global impact, but also because of its impact to the trajectory of the European project. Why this is significant? Because the European Union, or the European project, is seen by many observers as the embodiment of the liberal prescriptions in international relations. Even Stephen Walt recently wrote in the Foreign Affairs that, well, what's different from today and in the year 1940s, the closest thing to be said as the embodiment of the liberal prescription is the European Union. Of course, he continued with its limitation, but observers mostly see European Union as the embodiment of the liberal prescriptions in the IR, and this will have some impacts on its trajectory due to the Greece debt crisis. But of course, it's not the only factor. By saying that this affecting this, I'm not saying that this Greek debt crisis is the single factor that will affect the trajectory of the European Union or the trajectory of ASEAN, but I'm saying that this is maybe a symptom of a broader global trend that is experienced across the globe, experienced in the Europe, and maybe also will be experienced in ASEAN. This is also important in our discussion on ASEAN studies, because recently observers, mostly from the Europe, the European scholars, argued that ASEAN is becoming more EU-like, especially after the bouncing back after the ASEAN crisis in 1997 and 1998, with the introduction of the ASEAN Charter, the aspiration to be a rules-based organization, the introduction of the democratization agenda in ASEAN and other more liberal norms. And with this trend, many observers, mainly in Europe, argue that this jumpstart of ASEAN integration is taking EU as the model, just as Borzel and Rhys mentioned. But of course, there are different arguments from its counterparts in ASEAN. But despite the debates, then what will the impacts of this current development in Europe? If you believe that EU is the model for ASEAN, what will the impact? And if you do not believe that EU is the model for ASEAN, then what does the recent development in Europe means for us? This is the documents on the ASEAN Community Blueprint and the Naypyidaw Declaration on ASEAN Community post-2015 vision. Both are continuing, and the post-2015 also stressed the previously stated commitment for shared principles, values, and norms, enhanced external relations, and other liberal colors of the previous ASEAN community blueprints. But how is actually the relationship between the two regional organizations? First, if we look at the side of the European Union, EU is consciously seeing itself as a model for a regional integration. So it's both prescriptively and analytically see that itself, that EU is a model for regional integration, and they are willing to export their model of integration across the globe, from Southeast Asia to South or Central America. For example, in 2002, Romano Prodi made a speech that EU must spread the new philosophy of international relations, which has made the European integration so successful. Romano Prodi was the president of the European Commission, also mentioned that something that is working in Europe, we can also make the case that it would also work globally. So we should export this idea of European style regional integration. In 2007, David Miliband introduced the term model power. Instead of becoming a superpower, Europe should act as a model power. Europe should act to provide the model for regional integrations for other regions and countries. But how actually it's received in ASEAN? While the scholars in the EU, or EU scholars, usually see ASEAN as the emulation of EU, most ASEAN scholars disagree. But before we go to there, why Europe is very in high spirit to spread the European style of integration? The first is for idealistic reason. There is a universalist tendency in almost all liberal prescriptions, I mean, from democratic peace theory to free trade to this idea of regional integration. It works for Europe, it works for us, it works for the Europe which was destroyed by the two world wars, so why couldn't it work for the other regions? So these universalist tendencies drive them to export this EU-style regionalism. And then also, of course, there is economic and strategic interest in order to influence the market in other regions, and also because of the limited use of coercive instruments due to EU's submission to the liberal prescriptions. It is done through political dialogue, conditionality, capacity building, technical and financial assistance. However, EU has to re-strategize, to repackage a lot of its model and its norms in different regions, including in ASEAN. However, most of ASEAN, scholars in ASEAN disagree with this Eurocentric view that ASEAN is a norm taker, a passive norm takers. ASEAN and ASEAN members are not passive norm takers according to them. While some of its elements are similar to the European Union, ASEAN is shaping its own regional integration. It may use some similar language, the three elements of ASEAN community, the three pillars, that kind of things, but the substance is different. So there is a mimicry and even localization. Ruben Wong in 2012 also argued that EU is nothing more than a passive reference point for ASEAN. Another criticism for the view that EU is the reason why ASEAN is becoming more liberal is the view that it's not only about EU and ASEAN. It's not only the relationship between the two, the external norm entrepreneur and the norm taker, or the one who is doing the localization, but also because structural factors matter. The end of the Cold War, the third wave of democratization, the ASEAN crisis, which creates the need to leverage, to make a leverage on ASEAN. So ASEAN needs to have a normative pressure to create a more visible presence. Okay, then I will just go to the, my point here is then if, with that kind of understanding on the relationship between EU and ASEAN and how EU is becoming the model or not becoming the model of ASEAN, then what will be the Greece debt crisis says about the future trajectory of ASEAN? I have 3 points. First is the expected declining normative pressures. So while EU is going to be willing to continue to export its model, it now has more problems at home. So the toolbox for the norms diffusion is no longer usable in its full potentials. In 2011, for the first time in history, EU is cutting its budget. So that's from the external normative pressures, but also from the beyond the EU. Globally, the appeal of the liberalism is declining following the global crisis in 2008-2009, as Fukuyama and Birdsall mentioned. And domestically, there is a global trend of the nationalist turns, including in Southeast Asia. It is felt in Europe, it's felt in the United States, it's felt in Australia, it's also felt in Southeast Asian countries. The second is maybe realism never go actually, but let's say that there is a return to realism, at least even in the model liberal institution. The relationship between the EU and in managing this Greek debt crisis displays a realist mode of interaction, rather than framing the issue in a liberal way by saying that this is due to the interdependence, we should make a burden sharing. German could pay some cost of the recovery of Greek. European leaders, mainly led by Germany, tend to frame the issue as the clash between the hard-working Germans against profligate, carefree Greeks. So they are preferring to use the realist frame of the powerful and the weak, rather than using the frame of the liberal frame of cooperation. So that display of realist mode of interaction in the model liberal institution says a lot about the global trend. And of course, ASEAN, in Southeast Asia and is a very dynamic region, and we see a lot of more realist interactions here. The third part is the lesson from the EU probably is what I call as the integration overstretch. We sometimes assume that the larger, the deeper the integration, the better, as it happened in EU. But maybe that's not always the case. As happened in the case of Eurozone, there were warnings that economies with different levels of growth and competitiveness do not fit within a single monetary union. But because of this idea of linear integration, that the bigger, the larger, the deeper the integration will be better, then Greece was included. But it was not accompanied with the willingness to sustain such integration. That's why Germany preferred to frame this issue in this realist way of interaction. So maybe we could also learn from this. So in conclusion, does this mean that ASEAN will become less liberal? At least it's never really liberal, but never really like but at least at the formal level, will the previous statements in the charter or in the blueprints will be reversed? We do not think so. My guess is there will be path dependence. ASEAN technocrats will continue to sustain this idea of ASEAN integration and even make it deeper and larger. But there will be widening rhetoric action gap. So maybe formally there will be more call for integration, but there will be less concrete actions in realizing such commitments on the documents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sophan. So Professor Sophan already questions about the modalities, the pathway, the architectures of our regional integrations. Of course, the European Union is an inspiration for us, but we should come up with our own style regional integrations. I would like to set the rules for our panel. So after 10 minutes, I'll give each panelist to talk about 12 to 13 minutes, but after 10 minutes, I will ring a bell like this for once, so you guys, it's already 10 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm saved.
And then after next couple of minutes, I will do something like this, so you guys know it's time to wrap up. Okay. So next, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Apirat Petsiri, the Director of the Center for ASEAN Studies from Khon Kaen Universities, to tell us about the new trends. What is the new trend in ASEAN studies? So please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ajahn Piti. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to find where's my PowerPoint is because they all use the same names. Sorry. Now, well, that's okay. Maybe you can help me because everybody will have put all the PowerPoints in there, and it's all have the same names in. No. When I click in, it was somebody else's PowerPoint. No, so thank you. Okay, maybe. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you, Ajahn. Now, the question that I was responsible to ask as the organizers, which I thanks very much for inviting me, is the trends in ASEAN studies and particularly new trends. And well, I have to interpret the question as well as the new trends in ASEAN studies is the trend that we are hoping to see is a trend of preparedness and readiness for whatever things to come. And I come from far away not Indonesia, but of course, from the northeastern part of Thailand, which is of course bordering with Laos, Cambodia, and very much close to Vietnam as well. So we have the geographical advantage of knowing more of our neighbors where I'm stationed at, so that's Khon Kaen Universities. Next time maybe we can meet somewhere there. Nice place. Okay, I try to distinguish between old trend and new trends. Now, old trends about ASEAN studies. In the beginning, in 1967, everybody knows that we start the Bangkok Declarations, and 5 nations signed the declaration. Now, after the signing of the declaration, people always ask, the simple question, is it possible something that we start will be realized, first thing. And the second question of the old trend, which I always ask, is how far it can go. It was in the beginning, as we understood in the morning sessions, that it was starting with very much of the Cold War experience. And people believe that if the Cold War ends, ASEAN and all the association that we created will end accordingly. Now, even not, is it beneficial? If it benefit to whom? That's also the question that the old trend asks. And also people, some analysis would probably thinking of the obstacle of ASEAN. Now, and critics, of course, are always saying that that's impossible, something that is the never been, will be never realized. Now, after 48 years after the Bangkok Declaration, which of course it will become 48 years in this coming 8th of August. So we know that the old trends will die out because you will not ask anymore, is this possible, because it's 48 years, almost half a century. How far can it go? It can go far. That's for what we know. Even though not that far as the European Union or the EU. The EU is, I think, is created about 50-something years ago, which is not a very long time, I mean, compared to the ASEAN, because ASEAN is 48 years old. Benefit, is this benefit to anybody at all? Of course, we have the evidence indicating that all the things that happened since the signing of the Bangkok Declaration, there's less conflict. There's more cooperation in terms of economic, politics, and other social kind of a social familiarization between us as ASEAN nations. So there are obstacles, and people know what are they. Now, put these old trends aside, we're coming to the new trends. And the new trends, I'm not making this up. I'm sorry, I do not make this up. I was in the northeastern part of Thailand, and we conduct a kind of ASEAN affairs seminar or ASEAN conference among Thailand and in the region. And the region was called Mekong sub-region. It was consists of Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, and some part of southern China. So now people keep asking this question: what is your achievement? What is ASEAN achievement so far? So this has become the major issue. And then after that question, people keep asking what to do more. I mean, if we are now becoming ASEAN, what to do more? Can we do anything more? Or was it the thing that has already passed, we don't have to do anything? That is the question. Applicabilities, just like my friend saying here, that sometime we thought that we take the module of the European Union as example of integration, because it, sometimes it's very noble to follow some people who are very successful in their stories. So, but there are times when people ask, we are not we are not European citizen, we are not Europe, we are Asia. Are all of those things that's been done in Europe applicable to us? And if anything that happened during the past 48 years, all of these, the convention or of the agreements that has been signed among our members nation applicable in realities? Because sometimes you have a very good plan, a very good model, but when it comes to applicabilities, it's not always work the same as we thought it should. Now, the last question that's always asked is sustainabilities. Whether ASEAN and its goal and objective is sustainable. Are we really want to be like this all the time, or do we want any other kind of change? So that's the question that I think the ASEAN studies should be able to answer, even not now, but in the near future. Now, when we talk about our readiness for things to come, and we are thinking of what is to come, and the answer is it's maybe too simple, as we said, the community. But the term community is very much more sophisticated and what we think as community. So what's happening, as we heard from the morning session, all the government would come in and say, now you universities, people in the academia, go out and trying to explain the community. So what was laid down to the educators is you must go out and explain the term communities, which is very difficult because when we talk about community this time, we talk about the ASEAN community. Now, the preparedness or to be ready is something that we think we should be able to do. I said the universities or the academia. Now, what should we be ready? Ready for what? Now, I distinguish two sets of readiness. One is for the general public, and the other is for the more complicated or more difficult people. Not complicated, but more difficult people. No. The general public is very easy people, very good people like you and me. And there are other difficult people. Now, the general public that we should work and we should explain the benefits of becoming community, which is very easy. I mean, I try to explain this to the folk in the province where I'm working with, and they understand very well. I said in the beginning they asked, now what is the benefit of becoming AEC? I said, sharing, please. Sharing everything that you have, just like you do in your own communities. You have expert, then now we are sharing experts in the movement of skilled labor. We are sharing. Now, the Singaporean has a very good experienced people in certain field. Thailand, Indonesia, and Laos, Cambodia has their own expert. Now, they're stationed in one countries. They work sometimes not in the area that they should be working at. So we establish some form of sharing so that people that we know they are good can come and share in the place where they can do their best. So this is the idea which I explained to the folks in the province. And they said, oh yeah, the same. Because we did the same thing in the province. We did the same thing in our community. We share. So when we talk about this, the ASEAN community or AEC, now they understand. And the folk in the province understood it very easily. Now, that's talk about the easy people. But the difficult people, of course, we will talk about it later. Now, and new economic changes that might be more difficult because in the community that might be used to some form of economic setup. So now it is more difficult to tell them what they should be ready for. Political and securities, of course, this is some kind of cooperation. But as some people in the panelists in this morning said, you know, you have people in the border areas who are intermarried between many nations. So when we talk about security, when we talk about cooperation, that is very easily understand. You have the guy who is the head of the village in Thailand, has the mother of Laos nationalities, and have the father of Vietnamese. So when we talk about cooperation in security, it's very easy. You know, because you know that they all together will have to share something, and not so difficult to explain, right? Now, for social and cultural familiarization, this thing is also not difficult, because once you may realize that in your community you have your own ways of culture, but this thing can be easily introduced, and ordinary people will be easily understand of the culture. For example, we use rice culture, which is always very easy, and I think in many places. Now Chula is working on rice culture because we have this youth ASEAN exchange, and then the thing that Chula was trying to make people of ASEAN understand each other is through rice cultivation and rice culture. Which means that everybody in this room knows what rice is and how to grow right, but nobody knows how to grow right in Thailand and how to grow right in Indonesia. So the exchange of this culture is very important, but it's very easy for folk people. Now, the last thing is ASEAN particulars, essential, and beliefs. This thing is, we have to admit that we believe in different religion, different cultures, different folk stories. We have maybe Thailand, we share with Cambodia and Laos about the folk stories, because sometimes we know the same stories, but we will not share the same story with Indonesia. But we share something, we share Ramayana. It's the same. But Ramayana is just similar to the Greek myth. So everybody in Asia know about Ramayana. Everybody in ASEAN understood about Ramayana. So these things, of course, I would say this is the particulars and belief of ASEAN that we should be prepare our people. Now, study and knowledge, I think I go over this. Now we come to the difficult people. The leaders, the higher level, the politicians, and what we call the officials. These are more difficult, not because they are non-folk. They are the same as us, but they have their own responsibilities. They have to lead. They have to meet their objective. They have to reach their goals. As one of the panelists this morning said, the Thai government are now looking for the ASEAN's studies in all of the education institution in Thailand. I don't know how many, must be thousands of 10,000 of institutions from the elementary school to the universities to be able to teach and to be able to make people understand about the ASEAN. But one important thing is that the higher rank officials has to understand it too. Now, this is a very difficult one because in the bureaucrat areas, you believe in the different things. And there are so much interest where people or in the higher rank or in the government level were constrained by. And people are up there is not the folk, they can do things easily, but up there in the governmental level, they are not easy going people. So we have to ask them to understand about the political cohesive community, which is of course very difficult to understand. Economically integrated is of course more difficult. Socially responsible is very difficult to attain. Truly people-oriented, the government official is not very happy with truly people-oriented. The people-oriented is the obstacle to their implementation of rules and regulation and the order from the top government. So truly people-oriented is not very comfortable with the leaders or the higher official level. People-centered and rule-based ASEAN. Of course, all of these are not easily grasped by this 10 minutes. Thank you. So we have...
I'm so sorry about the